CBS Young and the Restless spoilers next week, full episodes March 9th to 13th, 2026. These news stories are increasingly demanding our attention, so as not to miss a single detail. Jack Abbott's disappearance has created a silent storm that few truly grasp, and those who do know are trapped in a secret that cannot be yet revealed. The truth is too explosive, too dangerous, and the consequences will spread to every powerful family in the city if it is exposed. Phyllis Summers is not easily shocked, but the moment Billy revealed what really happened, the atmosphere in the room seemed to vanish. Phyllis is a greedy, scheming woman who won't give up easily. Victor Newman kidnapped Jack Abbott. This information is so unbelievable it's almost absurd, but Billy's expression carries the weight of someone who knows exactly how dangerous the situation truly is. Victor and Phyllis are now connected, and there are rumors that they have a plan, with Phyllis acting as a spy. Only a handful of people knew Jack was missing, and among them, time was running out. Billy explained everything carefully, each word heavy with reluctance. Victor had made his demands clear. If they wanted Jack alive, the Chancellor had to be transferred. The company would pass through Billy's hands and then directly to Victor. It was a brutal exchange, the kind of deal Victor Newman had built his empire on. Power for survival. Phyllis threatened Billy. She wouldn't be foolish enough to comply with his demands. She had fought too many battles in Genoa to be intimidated by Victor's tactics. In fact, the more Billy spoke, the more impossible the whole proposal seemed to her. The Chancellor wasn't a pawn to be easily passed down hand to hand in a desperate attempt to appease Victor's rage. She knew the magnitude of what Billy was asking for. This wasn't just a corporate move. It was the surrender of one of the city's most powerful legacies. Phyllis laid out a condition, forcing Billy to comply or Jack would die. Her words carried the calm certainty of someone who had begun thinking long and hard. Billy watched her carefully, recognizing that the fire in her eyes signaled this conflict was about to escalate far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Elsewhere in the city, another conversation was taking place, only deepening the chaos. Adam Newman stood face to face with Nikki, his voice low and strained as he explained what he believed had to happen. Adam had spent his life dealing with the unpredictable storms his father had created, but even he could tell when Victor had crossed a line of dangerous absurdity. Jack's kidnapping wasn't just another ruthless strategy. That was a statement that could destroy everything Victor had painstakingly built over decades. If the truth were revealed, Victor could not only lose his reputation, but also face consequences that even his power could not avoid. Adam insisted they stop Victor before things got worse. Nikki listened silently, her face torn between loyalty and fear. Adam's proposal sounded extreme, but he argued it might be the only way to protect Victor from the disaster he had created. They needed to declare Victor mentally unstable and place him under psychiatric supervision. Officially, it would appear that Victor had lost his judgment and needed medical treatment. Unofficially, it would prevent authorities from considering his actions a calculated crime. To anyone outside the Newman family, the idea sounded cruel or even treacherous. But Adam understood the ruthless logic behind it. If Victor is caught and prosecuted, the consequences will be irreversible. However, if he is declared mentally incapacitated, the whole story could change. Victor Newman wouldn't be a criminal mastermind responsible for kidnapping a rival. He would be an aging giant who has suffered a mental breakdown. Adam leaned closer, his voice urgent but controlled. This was not a betrayal. It was rescue. Victor had built a kingdom through ruthless decisions, but this time he had gone too far. The only way to save him from prison was to convince the world that he was no longer capable of controlling himself. And so, while Phyllis prepared to wage war against Victor Newman, another secret plan began forming inside the Newman family itself. One path led to revenge. The other led to deception designed to protect a fallen patriarch. Neither side fully understood how close they were to a collision that would shake Genoa City to its core. Because somewhere far from the city, Jack Abbott was still missing, and the clock was quietly running out.
Diane Jenkins Abbott had survived enough storms in Genoa City to recognize the difference between ordinary danger and something that could permanently reshape a life. Jack's disappearance did not feel like a scandal that would be cleaned up with press statements and boardroom maneuvers. It felt like a deliberate erasure, the kind of vanishing act that only happens when someone powerful wants the truth to stay sealed. The longer Jack remained unreachable, the more Diane's fears sharpened into a kind of waking horror, because every hour without proof turned into a new nightmare scenario. She kept replaying his last known movements, interrogating every tiny detail as if she could squeeze a map out of memory, but what haunted her most was the silence. No ransom demand, no messy trail, no rumor mill feeding on a juicy mystery. In Genoa City, silence was never accidental. Silence meant control, and Diane knew exactly who had made an art form out of controlling narratives until they strangled everyone else. While Diane's world narrowed into a single obsession, finding Jack before the city swallowed him whole, Phyllis Summers was fighting a different war and losing it in a way that cut even deeper. Her newest attempt to repair what had shattered between her and Daniel Romalotti Jr. collapsed almost the moment it began, not because Phyllis lacked passion or persistence, but because Daniel's hurt had hardened into something immovable. She had tried the careful approach, the patient approach, the approach that sounded mature and remorseful, yet none of it mattered when Daniel looked at her and only saw patterns, only saw damage, only saw the promise of more chaos disguised as love. For Phyllis, failure did not simply sting. It threatened her entire sense of leverage, because she had built her current strategy on the belief that she could reclaim Daniel's trust and use it as a key to unlock a much larger deal. Without Daniel's forgiveness, she wasn't just losing a relationship. She was losing a bargaining chip that she had already quietly cashed in her mind. That was why she turned to Cain Ashby with a proposal that sounded on the surface like a desperate gamble, and beneath it like a calculated trap. Phyllis told Cain that if he could persuade Daniel to forgive her, she would join him in returning Chancellor to Victor Newman. The words were sharp with pragmatism, almost transactional, as if she were talking about shifting shares rather than rebuilding a family bond. Cain, who understood ambition the way some people understood prayer, listened carefully and recognized what Phyllis was really offering, a partnership fueled by mutual self-interest, dressed in the language of necessity. Phyllis needed Daniel to soften. Cain needed a path to Victor. Both of them needed time, and time was the one resource Victor never granted to anyone, unless he was setting a trap. Still, Cain didn't flinch. He smiled in that smooth, controlled way that suggested he believed he could outmaneuver the most dangerous man in the city if he just kept his emotions tidy and his timing perfect. Phyllis matched that confidence because confidence was what she wore when fear threatened to break through. They agreed on their private truth without saying it out loud. Once they got what they wanted, they would betray the deal. They would hand Victor what he demanded long enough to secure their own objectives, then twist the knife and reclaim control. It was classic Genoa City arrogance, the belief that being clever meant being safe, the belief that Victor Newman could be played the way lesser men could. The problem was that Cain and Phyllis were acting as if Victor was a predictable opponent, as if his power was limited to boardrooms and bruising intimidation. They were forgetting that Victor did not simply fight with contracts and threats. He fought with human beings. He fought with relationships, with secrets, with humiliation, with pain. And most importantly, he fought with contingency plans. Their intention to double-cross him was not a brilliant twist. It was the kind of move Victor anticipated before they even congratulated themselves for thinking of it. The arrogance wasn't just that they planned to betray him. The arrogance was that they believed he wouldn't see it coming or that seeing it coming wouldn't matter. In their minds, they were stepping into a high-stakes negotiation. In Victor's world, they were stepping onto a chessboard where the pieces didn't realize they were already placed. Because Victor had gained another card, one that Cain and Phyllis had not factored into their scheme, Jack Abbott. Jack was no longer simply a missing man and a desperate search. He had become a weapon, a lever Victor could use to control outcomes without ever needing to raise his voice in public. Cain and Phyllis were so focused on their own manipulation that they failed to grasp the scale of Victor's cruelty and the elegance of his timing. With Jack in the shadows, Victor could pressure Diane into silence, rattle the Abbott family into paralysis, and keep the wider community from asking the wrong questions. Jack's absence became a muzzle on everyone's mouth because panic makes people careless, and carelessness creates openings Victor can exploit. It was not just that Victor had a hostage. It was that Victor had a narrative, and the narrative could be released at the exact moment it would cause maximum damage. On the Friday broadcast, the camera did not need Genoa City's skyline to communicate dread. It only needed the endless ocean and the claustrophobic luxury of a yacht that looked like freedom until you realized it was a moving cage. Jack was there, and for a while he had forced himself into a kind of brittle calm, the survival instinct of a man who understood that panic could get him killed faster than any enemy could. But something shifted as the hours stretched into days, and the reality refused to soften. Isolation does not always break people with violence. Sometimes it breaks them with repetition, with the same locked doors, the same quiet footsteps outside, the same polite meals delivered like a performance. Jack began to unravel, not in a dramatic explosion, but in the terrifying way a mind turns on itself when it can't find a rational path forward. He paced until his legs shook. He stared at his own reflection as if he were looking for the version of himself that had answers. He spoke aloud to the empty room, just to hear a human voice, and the sound of it made him feel even more alone. There were moments where the walls felt like they were inching closer, moments where the sea outside looked less like an escape route and more like an execution. The yacht didn't just trap his body. It trapped his sense of reality, and Jack had always been a man who survived by controlling his environment. Here, he controlled nothing. At first, Jack tried to tell himself that this was about Patty, that obsession had finally reached a point where it had become physically dangerous. That explanation was easier because it gave the situation a shape. One unstable woman, one desperate fantasy, one hostage. But the longer he watched the precision of his captivity, the harder it became to believe this was simply Patty's chaotic love story. There were too many details that felt engineered rather than impulsive. Too much quiet confidence in the way resources appeared, too much certainty in the route of the yacht, too much discipline in the timing of what Jack was allowed to see, and what he was kept from. Patty could be intense, relentless, even frightening, but she was not a strategist who played the long game with flawless control. Jack knew that kind of mind. Jack had battled that kind of mind for years. And as his fear sharpened into clarity, one name began to rise above the rest, not as a guess, but as an inevitability. Victor. The moment Jack allowed himself to truly consider it, everything snapped into place with sickening logic. Victor would have the motive. Victor would have the reach. Victor would have the appetite for a move this brutal because it didn't just harm an enemy. It humiliated him. It destabilized him. It made him pliable. Victor didn't need to destroy Jack immediately. Victor only needed to bend him to make him appear compromised, confused, defeated. Victor could use Jack's disappearance to force corporate concessions to terrify Diane into stopping the search to distract the Abbott family while other deals moved in the background. And if Patty was involved, Victor could hide behind her instability like a curtain, letting the world assume this was the result of obsession rather than orchestration. Jack's stomach turned as he recognized the brilliance of it. A kidnapping that looked like a romantic delusion would not trigger the same alarm bells as a kidnapping that looked like a business assassination. It was camouflage. It was Victor's signature evil with plausible deniability. Jack's descent into madness wasn't just fear anymore. It was rage. Rage at being reduced to a pawn. Rage at the idea that Victor was watching from afar with satisfaction. Rage at the possibility that every move Jack made on that yacht was being recorded and saved for later use. He started to see the yacht not as a place of captivity, but as a stage built for a future reveal. He understood then that the worst part of Victor's plan might not be the kidnapping itself. The worst part might be what Victor intended to do with the story, once Jack's image could be weaponized against him. And somewhere back in Genoa City, Diane was still searching. Phyllis was still bargaining. Cain was still smiling, as if he could outsmart a monster. And Adam was still trying to stop his father, before the entire Newman empire became a prison of its own. Jack stared out at the dark water, his reflection trembling in the glass like a ghost, and he made a vow that felt dangerous even to think. If Victor Newman was truly behind this, then the war in Genoa City was no longer about business. It was about survival. And the next move wouldn't belong to Cain or to Phyllis or even to Diane. The next move would belong to Victor, unless Jack could find the one crack in the system that proved Victor wasn't just manipulating Patty's obsession, but controlling it. Because if Patty wasn't the one responsible, if she was only a messenger or a mask, then Jack wasn't trapped in a love story gone wrong. He was trapped in Victor's game, and Victor never played a game he didn't intend to finish.